Imagine waking up one morning with a slight fever. By sunset, painful swellings begin to appear beneath your skin. By the next day, you can barely stand. And within a week, you are dead. Now imagine this happening not to one person, not to one family, but to millions. Welcome back to Past Portal. Today, we are traveling to the 14th century to witness one of the deadliest disasters in human history, the Black Death, a pandemic so devastating that it wiped out nearly half of Europe's population and changed the course of civilization forever. Close your eyes for a moment and picture Europe in the year 1347. There are no hospitals as we know them today, no antibiotics, no microscopes, no understanding of bacteria or viruses. People live in crowded towns surrounded by stone walls. Animals roam freely through narrow streets. Waste is dumped into open gutters. Clean water is scarce. To medieval Europeans, disease is a mystery sent by nature, fate, or God. And soon, a terrifying enemy will arrive that nobody can stop. The story begins thousands of miles from Europe, across the vast grasslands of Central Asia. Modern researchers believe the plague bacterium, known today as Yersinia pestis, circulated among wild rodents in this region for centuries. Trade routes connected Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Merchants carried silk, spices, precious metals, and countless other goods across continents. But hidden among these goods traveled something far more dangerous: fleas infected with a deadly disease. As trade expanded, the plague moved silently from region to region. Nobody noticed, nobody understood, and nobody was prepared. By the mid-1340s, the disease had reached areas surrounding the Black Sea. One of the most important trading ports in the region was the city of Caffa. Here, merchants from different cultures and nations exchanged goods from across the known world. During a siege of the city in 1346, a deadly outbreak spread among forces outside the walls. Several historical accounts describe how disease devastated the besieging army. Some chroniclers even claimed that infected corpses were thrown into the city. Historians continue to debate the exact details, but one fact is clear: the plague was moving west, and Europe stood directly in its path. In October 1347, ships arrived at the Sicilian port of Messina. What happened next would become one of history's most terrifying turning points. According to contemporary accounts, many sailors aboard the ships were already sick or dying. The disease spread rapidly through the city. Within weeks, panic consumed the population. Families watched healthy relatives become gravely ill in just a matter of days. Nobody knew why, nobody knew how to stop it, and the nightmare was only beginning. As the plague spread from port to port, fear followed close behind. Within months, the disease swept across Italy and began moving into France, Spain, and beyond. But what made the Black Death so terrifying was not just how many people it killed. It was how quickly it killed them. Most victims first experienced fever, chills, headaches, and extreme exhaustion. Then came the swollen lymph nodes. These painful swellings, known as buboes, often appeared in the groin, neck, or armpits. Some grew as large as eggs or apples. For many victims, even the slightest movement became unbearable. As the infection spread through the body, symptoms became increasingly severe. Dark patches appeared on the skin as tissues began to die. Some patients suffered internal bleeding. Others developed infections in their lungs, making breathing difficult and turning every cough into agony. Without effective treatment, survival was uncertain. Entire households could become infected within days. One family member fell sick, then another, then another. Soon, there was nobody left to care for the living or bury the dead. The disease moved faster than news could travel. Before one city fully understood what was happening, another was already overwhelmed. Europe was facing a disaster unlike anything it had ever experienced. As death spread, daily life began to unravel. Markets closed, businesses disappeared, farms were abandoned, trade routes became dangerous. Fear transformed communities. People avoided neighbors. Friends stopped visiting one another. Families became isolated. Many cities struggled to manage the growing number of deaths. Graveyards filled rapidly. Authorities were forced to create larger burial sites outside city walls. Workers responsible for transporting the dead faced overwhelming challenges as fatalities continued to rise. Contemporary accounts describe cities that seemed strangely quiet. Streets that once echoed with merchants, travelers, and craftsmen became nearly empty. Church bells rang constantly. Funerals became so frequent that many could no longer be conducted individually. In some places, the social fabric that held communities together appeared to be breaking apart. The psychological impact was immense. Nobody knew who would be next. Nobody knew whether the outbreak would ever end. And every cough, every fever, every unexplained illness became a source of terror. For many Europeans, it felt as if the world itself was coming to an end. Without scientific knowledge, people searched desperately for answers. Why was this happening? What had caused such unimaginable suffering? Different explanations emerged. Some believed poisonous air was responsible. Others blamed unusual weather, earthquakes, or celestial events. Many saw the plague as divine punishment. Religious processions became increasingly common. People gathered to pray for protection and mercy. Some groups believed public acts of repentance would end the catastrophe. Among the most famous were the flagellants. These groups traveled from town to town, performing dramatic public rituals. They believed suffering and repentance could help restore God's favor. Yet fear also produced darker consequences. Across Europe, innocent communities became targets of suspicion and violence. False accusations spread rapidly. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Minority groups were unfairly blamed for a disaster they had no connection to. History remembers these events as tragic examples of how fear and misinformation can fuel persecution. The plague was devastating enough on its own, but human panic often made the suffering even worse. Eventually, the first great wave of the plague began to decline, but Europe would never be the same. Historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of the continent's population may have died. The scale of loss was almost unimaginable. Entire villages disappeared. Fields went uncultivated. Homes stood empty. Yet from this catastrophe emerged profound change. With fewer workers available, labor suddenly became far more valuable. Surviving peasants and craftsmen found themselves in a stronger position than ever before. Landowners who once held tremendous power now faced labor shortages. Workers could demand better wages and improved conditions. Old economic structures began to weaken. New opportunities appeared. Wealth passed to surviving family members. Some people inherited land, businesses, and property that would previously have been beyond their reach. Over time, these changes contributed to the growth of a larger middle class. The plague also changed how people viewed life itself. After witnessing so much death, many became more interested in art, learning, literature, and human achievement. This shift in thinking helped lay foundations for one of history's greatest cultural transformations, the Renaissance. The Black Death remains one of humanity's most devastating pandemics. It exposed the limits of medieval knowledge. It revealed the fragility of societies. And it demonstrated how quickly life can change when faced with forces beyond human control. Yet it also revealed something else: human resilience. Communities rebuilt, cities recovered, knowledge advanced, and civilization moved forward. Today, centuries later, the story of the Black Death continues to remind us of both the dangers of disease and the strength of those who endure it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this episode of Passportal, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us which historical mystery or forgotten catastrophe you would like to explore next. Until next time, stay curious and never stop exploring the past.